A mysterious, haunting tale, John's disappearance. On a cold evening, John returned home after a long day of work in the city. The sky was thick with clouds, and the wind howled through the trees, its eerie whispers quickening his steps toward his old, decrepit house on the outskirts of town. Since he'd moved into this house, John had always felt something strange about it. The building was old, its walls cracked, and the furniture coated with layers of dust as though time had stopped inside. Still, there was something familiar about the place, something comforting. Perhaps it was the isolation, or maybe it was the feeling that he was hiding something from the world, something even he couldn't put into words. He closed the door softly behind him and, as usual, took off his shoes at the entrance. The air felt heavy in the house, as if it had absorbed the weight of countless forgotten years. His heart beat a little faster, a sensation that always lingered the moment he stepped inside. He climbed the stairs, but paused midway, his senses alert. He could hear something. A faint sound, almost like whispers, coming from the living room. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold draft was seeping through the crack. Hesitating for a moment, John pushed the door open. The room was dark, save for a thin sliver of moonlight shining through the open window, casting a pale glow on a corner of the room. In that corner, he saw it, a shadow, moving slowly, as though it was attached to the wall, stretching and undulating. His heart raced. He couldn't move. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, echoing in his mind. "You won't leave, you won't leave, you'll never leave." Frozen in place, he wanted to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The shadows seemed to multiply, wrapping around him, pulling him toward them. The voice, once a whisper, now grew into a scream that filled his ears. "You won't leave." John stepped back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The door, which had once been slightly ajar, slammed shut with a deafening bang. He spun around, trying to escape, but the walls seemed to close in on him. The room, once familiar, now felt alien, wrong. He turned back to the door, desperate to leave. But it wouldn't open. No matter how hard he tried to push or pull, the door remained locked tight, as though something on the other side was holding it closed, trapping him inside. And then the shadow moved again, but faster this time. It slithered across the floor and reached out toward him. He felt an icy, invisible grip on his chest. He gasped for air, but the air around him grew thick, suffocating. His vision blurred, and he could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The shadow engulfed him, and in that final, horrifying moment, he felt something cold touch the back of his neck. It was as if a hand had reached into his very soul, pulling him into the darkness. The room seemed to swallow him whole, and then everything went silent. The next morning, the neighbors noticed the door of John's house was wide open. Curiously, they peeked inside, but found no sign of him. The house was exactly as it had been the night before, the furniture in its place, the dust untouched. His phone, his jacket, his bag, all were gone. No trace of John remained. The police were called, and for weeks they searched the house and the surrounding area. They asked around, investigated every lead, but there was no sign of him. It was as though he had simply vanished, swallowed up by the house itself. There were no clues, no evidence, no trace of his disappearance. As time passed, the story of John's sudden vanishing became the subject of local rumors. Some said he had simply left, moved on without a word, but deep down, everyone knew the truth. Something dark had happened to him in that house. And so, the house was left abandoned, its windows clouded with grime and its doors creaking in the wind. The once familiar place now felt even more unnerving. People who passed by said they could still hear whispers coming from the house on quiet nights, whispers that called out to anyone brave enough to listen. "You won't leave, you won't leave." The house stood there, in the same eerie silence, with no one ever daring to live in it again. And as for John, he was never found. His disappearance remained a mystery, one that no one could explain. Perhaps, he was still trapped somewhere within those walls. Or maybe, he had never truly left at all.